Gran Turismo versus Forza has been a fight that lasted since 2005, and since then these two titles have traded blows, with many arguing the supremacy of one over the other. The new generation of these games are out, so I want to give you my 2 cents on the current state of the battle. But before going there, this video is not to humiliate a side, but merely to show what I think of both titles at the moment. I'm aware that Forza was released not long ago, so it won't have the same level of updates. I have paid full price for both titles, so if you feel insulted about something, remember, it's all in your head. In this video, we will cover presentation, content, graphics, performance, driving physics, force feedback, AI, and multiplayer. And by the way, I am playing Gran Turismo 7 on the PlayStation 5 and Forza on the PC. Despite both of these games being car collecting and racing games, they couldn't be more different titles. As a series, Gran Turismo has always been eclectic. The history and stories of racing have always been front and center, all through the lens and tastes of Kazunori Yamauchi had for the time. On Gran Turismo 1 through 4, they were really centered around car culture with plenty of homages to real racing. 5 through 6 brought racing figures like Ayrton Senna or historic cars like the Moonlander. 7 seems to me that it has followed a change in taste of a more mature Kazunori. That is very visible at the cafe, and the cafe visually shows itself as a very upmarket experience, something for the car connoisseur. That is further presented by something that I consider one of the big shifts, not only in tone, but also in terms of game structure, that will be the menus. These menu books are front and center as the way to progress through the game. The tone is a bit too mature. Every single time a menu is unlocked or finished, a story about a brand or a car comes out like they are describing the growing season of a wine grape. It can really be interesting, and I'm saying it can be because while the stories behind a Porsche or 4GT can be interesting from a car enthusiast perspective, I'm really not too sold on the value of menus for cars like the Prius. I can say that these menus become really old really fast because they don't present a way forward for me in terms of presentation. I preferred the previous way they used to do it, which was with championships. For these menus to complete them, you can either buy the cars if you can find them, or you can just race on the races and they'll present you the car, and with that you will be unlocking car XP, which becomes the way to unlock tuning parts from the store or parts of the gameplay like the online or certain races, licenses, or even events. As for Forza's presentation, it is far more bare bones. A lot of the menus are simplified and straightforward, but in my opinion a bit too much. The presentation, much like older Forzas from the past, bar when they add the 3 bottom gear guys, is really straight to the point. At times, considering the amount of history and brands they have, it becomes a little bit sad. In terms of events, Forza doesn't have anything as close in terms of variety of races or types of events. In reality, there is a huge disappointment at this time. It's about 40 to 50 races in total, and that's really about it. There's really no feeling of opening up the game or progressing through different modes of playing. The car progression is also hugely different as well, as it is tied to car XP for every single car to unlock car parts rather than unlocking everything else in the game. This progression does take quite a bit per car, so it means that every car is locked behind at least an hour of gameplay to get everything out of the way. It was so bad before the latest update that the best way to progress through the game, and I'm not kidding here, was not to play the game by leaving every aid on and letting the car you want to upgrade doing the driving by itself. It is still a problem, but not as much now. I understand what they're trying to do here. They are trying to give you a connection to the car, so you spend time so you get the upgrades for the car. But let's say if you want to build a bunch of cars to try them out, this will become very old very fast. It's time to talk about content, and Gran Turismo offers 38 tracks with 81 layouts and 118 possible configurations. In terms of cars, we are talking about 491 cars. The tracks are a mix between real tracks and old ones. Sadly, some of the previous real-life tracks from 5 and 6 are not present, like Silverstone, Côte d'Azur, or Indianapolis. What should be present is subscribing to the channel. The car selection is wide and keeps expanding with every single update, but it's sometimes incomplete. We have many types of cars, like JDM Aeros, newly launched cars, excellent vintage cars like the McLaren F1. There's a bit for everybody, and every single car can be tuned. Some of the car choices come from Gran Turismo 5. Cars like the Megane RS or Polo GTI haven't been updated to the newest generation. Others are under-trimmed, like the Peugeot RCZ or the Alfa Romeo Mito. In these two cases specifically, the choices presented are just average or entry-level trims, when the far more interesting top-of-the-line cars like the RCZR or the Quadrifoglio Verde were available, even at a time when these cars were modeled into Gran Turismo 5 and 6. But GT7 is really about car collecting. All the tone, all the stories about the car in the cafe makes you really feel like a car collector. And some of the cars are bought through the regular dealership, other cars on the used section, and others you'll have to go to the legendary dealership. The legendary dealerships are for the rarer cars, and some of them can cost upwards of 20 million. As for Forza, it offers 20 tracks with 36 layouts and over 500 cars. Contents-wise, lots of tracks are missing, like Brands Hatch, Monza, Nordschleife. Nordschleife will come later, and Imola, Road America, but also the regular ones from the past like Alps, Rio, or Prague. The track list isn't expensive in the least. The car selection is generally okay, as it covers most of the popular brands and models, all the way from entry-level econoboxes to modern supercars. Rarer cars from the Euro or Japanese market also appear in the choices. Still, both of them will have a good selection. Polyphony has offered increased content, normally cars, over the course of the almost 2 years it has been out. With every update, they will deliver free content, and therefore DLCs should be rare, and the microtransactions, even though they exist, you really don't need them. Forza, on the other hand, of course, it's fairly new. At this moment, is only 1 month old, so in terms of content, it hasn't really expanded yet. At the time of writing, the new Yas Marina will be on update 2. Still, the brunt of new content should be offered via season packs or DLCs. Both of them car collecting games, but we need to talk about something that is center part of the games, which will be the customization. Forza has always been the standard for this, and to be fair, it's still slightly ahead. All cars can be tuned, customized, have their engines and drivetrains swapped. This can mean some cars can be made absolute monsters like the Nissan Pulsar. You can put a GTR engine inside and change it to four-wheel drive. Gran Turismo, on the other hand, has definitely shortened the gap. The car customization and tuning is comprehensive. As well, it is possible to change engines, provided you get to level 50 in the game. Some of the swaps are natural, others are absolutely insane. For example, you can get a Honda K20 engine in a Honda Beat. This engine swap will make the Honda Beat go over 400 kilometers an hour. This talk about content will lead to the next very important point, which will be very contentious. We're going to talk about graphics. And graphics-wise, for me, Gran Turismo is unbeatable at the moment, no matter the platform. Polyphony delivers a graphical product that encompasses every single detail. The interior of the car is extremely well designed. The textures, the choice of upholstery, everything is to the point. The outside of the cars has the same level of care as well. One look at the headlights and you'll see the reflective pattern being extremely well represented. These patterns are not just textures. The same level of care is shown to the tracks as well. The detail is absolutely phenomenal in real life tracks. The elevations, the tree coverages, moving spectators, and background traffic all give a sense of immersion that the track is alive. The real tracks are absolutely phenomenal. Everything is to the point. The laser scans that they use are extremely good. Everything is photorealistic, but the detail is also going to transfer to the Fantasy original tracks. There are next-gen tracks that came from sports. These received mild upgrades for 7. The revamped older tracks like Trial Mountain or the newly added Grand Valley are extremely different from their predecessors. The layout has changed, even the scenery has changed in the case of Grand Valley. For Forza though, the looks are extremely bipolar. It can have beautiful scenes where the lights look better than Gran Turismo, then 2 seconds later the image becomes crunched, contrasty, and a mess. Forza Horizon, in the other hand, looks absolutely stunning 100% of the time. Doesn't matter if you are in the middle of the jungle, if it's rain or shining, if you are in a tunnel, whatever it is. I know it's a different studio in all, but such a massive difference isn't really explainable. This doesn't get any better with the car models, and Turn 10 in this case took a page out of Polyphony in Gran Turismo 5 and 6 by using GT4 models and decides to use Forza 4 models in 2023 with very slightly details. So for these older cars, the interiors will feel jagged, the material shaders aren't really as good, making the game feel dated. Outsides, even with the newer models, the paint quality or the reflections, the way that the light works, feels like I'm racing 2 generations ago on the Xbox 360. Once again, I'm all for older racing titles, but we're talking about a AAA title with AAA prices, and I paid close to £100 for this. Sadly, the track models aren't much better. The track models not only feel dated, but they also feel that they aren't even accurate at all. I know they say that track models are laser scanned, but I do see issues. All other titles that are laser scanned have essentially the same track, the same elevations, with minute differences here and there, but the way the track is essentially exactly the same in terms of size, in terms of differences between corners. You can take Spa, for example. It's pre or route change. That would mean that the track that they got or the laser scan is older, but then the scale feels absolutely off in the Camel Straight. Between all the real tracks they have, only really Kyalami looks the part. Everything else either looks outdated or outright wrong. So in terms of graphics, between these two games, for Forza to look good, it needs everything to be aligned. For Gran Turismo to look good, it does it basically 100% of the time, rain or shines. Okay, as for performance, generally Gran Turismo does 4K 60 in ray tracing modes all the time, but the ray tracing modes isn't really ray tracing mode all the time, it's basically on a replays, but it does have a performance mode as well. At 1080p, it will never stutter. There's a 1440p VRR mode that will target 120 Hz when possible, but generally it works well all the time. Just very recently, I've changed my capture card to a 4K 61, and because of that, I've changed the resolution of the console to 4K 60, and for that, I did have a couple of hiccups, but just momentarily. This means that the performance mode and also the high quality mode is rock solid. As for Forza though, there are big problems in all platforms. In the PC, it is an absolute mess at the moment and will take some time to get sorted. It doesn't matter if it's with or without ray tracing, graphics card or CPU, it will stutter, and even with beefy setups, getting over 70 FPS can be difficult at times. This is of course with kind of a beefy setup. If you have a non-beefy setup on the PC, I would recommend you to get an Xbox because this is not going to go well. Now for the biggest contention point of all, and probably the reason why you all are here, the driving and physics. These are driving games made to be enjoyed by a vast array of drivers in different setups, from gamepads to the last generation of direct drives and everything in between. Where it mostly matters, in this point, I enjoy both, and I'm gonna give it a draw. Not as a cop-out, but because the two directions these teams have chosen for these games shine really well, even though they have some issues. And before all the sim racing guys come here, I don't care, these two games drive nicely, they're fun, and they should be praised for that. Start with Gran Turismo. It is all about driving finesse, keeping in the inputs in line, don't do any sudden change of steering. It has some sensitivity to large inputs in the wheel or pedals. The cars need to stay inside the tire slip angle, as going past it, it will induce a lot of sliding around. In this case, Gran Turismo teaches a lot of car control because that's the way to drive the car in this game. The physics are still extremely relatable and you drive as you expect these cars to drive, no matter where the wheel drive is or the engine layout. There are a few interesting nuggets about all-wheel drives, because depending on the engine layout of these all-wheel drives, because you have to remember there are some that are transversal, some that are longitudinal. In Gran Turismo 7, transversal all-wheel drives like the Subarus will feel extremely understeery, like they are front-wheel driven cars with a bit of rear traction, because in reality that's what they are. Going towards the Nissan Skylines, the R32 and the R34, they are longitudinal and they are more rear biased with a bit of front assistance. This is probably the title that does make it feel like these technicalities are more to the front and they have more attention from developers. Forza doesn't have this nuance set so front and center, and the Assetto Corsa generally requires some modded cars or physics to have something like this. And the rest of the physics of this game also work well with the bumps and the suspension and the aero loads, dirty air, and so on. Forza also drives really well, but there's something to be said about the stock setups in cars. Those will make the driving a little bit awkward until the tire pressures and suspension are changed. And for suspension settings, it may require a suspension upgrade. Still, I think that the handling is generally well done. It does drive like a real car. It may require some tinkering around with the setup, but everything else like the power, the acceleration, or if the car is a front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, it feels like is on a point. While Gran Turismo 7 is all about finesse, Forza, you do feel like you can muscle the car a little more. There's a little more sliding around and you need to try to figure out if you can go over it or not. In my opinion, the driving just needs to be a little more grounded if it had a little more of that clinical nature of Gran Turismo without going all the way towards Gran Turismo. I think this new Forza would have something fantastic here, and maybe in the future with the updates it will get there. The tire model is actually pretty interesting to understand and very easy to do so, where the grip is and even how much grip is there. It has this progressive grip feel in the tires without a sudden cliff. It is natural and believable. Right from the handling, we have to use force feedback, and this is also a very interesting topic. Gran Turismo 7 at launch had horrible force feedback, but over a year later is far more developed. All the feeling is now there. On the DD1, which I've used more recently, and the affiliate links will be in the description below if you want to help the channel out, it does feel now super connected and planted. The limits of adherence are easily felt. I still need to check if drifting after 1.4 update is good, because the force feedback refresh rate at high-speed movements, especially after the slip angle is exhausted, was so muted no matter the force feedback settings. Maybe this has changed since 1.3 or something like that. But generally, the force feedback is okay. As for Forza, the stock settings aren't good at all. I'll said it before, I'll say it again, they're really bad. The default settings have a huge dead zone ingrained, so that needs to be removed. It's the first thing you really need to do. It's only 1%, but it's already too much. The stock settings are very strange. You really need to go through the lists if you're using a wheel. When tuned, it finally has some connection to the road. The feel is there, understeer, oversteer, slip angles, tire bending, curbs, and so on. This was tested with a DD1 and also with an Acetec Forte. I wasn't expecting the Forte to work so well, but it absolutely does. And also remember to save the settings into a profile, because for starters, the game forgets settings and then also forgets what profile you add the settings in, and every single time you load this game, you have to put the correct profile. One last point about the handling, we'll need to talk about the rain driving and rain in general. Here I think Gran Turismo has some of the best dynamic weather out there. The weather develops in a way that is totally natural on the track, and also it develops in areas of the track. As the weather comes in, it will cover the track in different areas, and in an extreme you can have a dry portion of the track and a wet portion of the track. Now, what absolutely blows me away is the way that the puddles will develop as the weather comes in. Take, for example, you get a lot of rain, you get puddles developing all around, and then if the sun comes out, the track will dry, but the puddles will stay. So you'll get a new dry line coming in, but the puddles, because they have like an amount of water, it will take time to evaporate, and this game emulates that really well. Graphically, I think it is impeccable. The rain driving is challenging and believable. You will have to go over the wet or dry line depending on the tire and the state of the track. Aquaplaning can happen, and driving in the rain is basically as you'd expect. Forza has a more simplified weather and went for a more dramatic, contrasty look. It's also dramatic how bad the rain looks in the windscreen. It just looks horrible. The rain driving itself is okay, it's nothing to write home about. The dynamic track isn't really much dynamic, it's more like Seto Corsa Competizione as the track develops in particularly scripted ways. In terms of driving, it is okay, it's more like a grip sheen, it has some puddles, but it does its job well. Regardless, both titles have tire compounds to adjust to different stages of the race, giving strategy to the races where you can really bet if the weather is going to improve, or betting that the worst tire compound won't lose that much time, so if you want to go long on it and finish the race or something like that, you can do that. For that, I actually appreciate the way they have done it. As we know, the single player is a really big component of these titles, and it's the effort to get all of those missions in series. Therefore, you'll have to play against the AI. It is here that the comparisons become interesting between titles. Currently, Gran Turismo has two modes of AI, the regular one and the new one called Sophie. The regular one is tremendously basic, to say the least. They just do a conga line and that's about it. It has been the same since the launch, and I don't mean the launch of Gran Turismo 7, I mean since the launch of Gran Turismo. As for Sophie, it's the advanced AI, and the current state of Sophie is really very much bare bones, but still very interesting. Sophie reacts to the player, it formulates defenses, it formulates loitering, tries to attack, reacts to other AI, it's reactive, it's proactive. Sadly, it is still very limited, as only 9 tracks are supported, not all cars are compatible, and it doesn't really seem to scale with car tuning options. The difficulty options are as well very limited. 3 difficulty options, they come with fixed race lengths as well. The thing about Sophie AI is the future. This is an AI based on reinforcement techniques. It's likely in the future it will expand its repertoire as it gets more data, and then we get new versions of Sophie coming out every single update. But even though I like Sophie and I like what they're trying to do, it is good, but once again, it's still limited. Forza's AI really needs a lot of work. Difficulty-wise, I don't really find them that difficult. Some tracks gives a better skill rating to the AI than the others, but you can change the difficulty of the AI if you want to. The problem is really sharing the track with the AI. It is good that they aren't really moving traffic cones that are normally associated with Gran Turismo. The problem arises at trying to race side by side or from behind or from the front. Turn 1 is always a mess, and if you aren't really getting pushed around by the AI will have no problem whatsoever pushing the other AI around. To be fair, I don't really dislike it. I think it has a place in racing, wreckfest or otherwise. You'll have to remember, if in club level, if you drive in real life, aggressive, dirty drivers like this exist. But the problem is that oftentimes the racing skill drops to the bottom where they fail to understand a racing line or even where to brake. It is extremely common to go through an apex at speed just to understand that the AI decided to stop in front of us. The last few years with racing games, they brought multiplayer into center stage. The two titles couldn't be more different about it, even if at a glance they look similar. Gran Turismo has 2 main modes, one called Sports and the Lobby mode. There's split screen, but that's for local multiplayer. In the Sport modes, there will be the regular daily racing. Once in a while, the Gran Turismo Nation Cup qualifiers will appear there, and you also have something to get a few credits from, which will be the time trials. The sports races will tier every driver against each other on a quasi-on-demand system for races that can be joined almost instantly. Sports matchmaking system rates individual drivers based on performance and safety. Both ratings go from the worst, which is D, to the best, which will be S, and will pair each driver with a split that matches their rating. Sport mode doesn't have a traditional qualify setting. You can grind the qualify time for a week and then you are matched to a race based on your skill and safety rating, but your starting position will be based on your qualify time. As for the races, there are admittedly many ups and downs. Drivers can be overly aggressive in committing to extreme maneuvers like hairpins with 3 or even more cars, and of course, because of that, crashes will happen often due to these situations. Penalties are in a very bad state as of this moment. It's really not uncommon to have certain drivers abuse the penalty system to commit on-road murder, get away with it, and having the victim slapped with a penalty. Regardless, it's mostly due to safety rating, as these issues reduce substantially in S rating. In a good split, there will be good racing. Penalties, though, really need to improve. As for the lobby mode, this is where the old Gran Turismo multiplayer survives, with more community-driven events with races, drag races, drifting, and so on. You basically have a browser, you choose what you want to drive, and you can change your car on the fly. You can even use your own car and set your own rules. As for Forza, the lobby system is really not global like the ones you have in iRacing, Assetto Corsa Competizione, Low Field Motorsports, or Gran Turismo 7, where basically the player is bunched up in a pool, sorted by rating, and then inserted in a server with closely matched drivers. In this case, it's really more instanced, and the servers will fill up as people sign due to the structure of the multiplayer. Believe it or not, this structure is where the multiplayer becomes super enjoyable for me, as it is closer to the titles I play the most. We are dropped into a session where, much like single player, we can practice. Setups can be changed, you can change your tire compounds, you can change with your fuel levels, do a few laps to test the tire degradation, your setup, and so on. There might be variable weather, adding another layer of complexity to the system. So the qualify is more traditional, a mix between Assetto Corsa Competizione and iRacing, where you have 3 laps to set your best time, while the other players share the track with you, but they only share it in ghost mode. Going towards the race, we are met with some Forza staples, one I've mentioned here before, which will be the driving. It's extremely good. The driving is easy to understand and drive, but also challenging enough to provide a ceiling in the relation to what is expected from the cars being driven. For example, the TCR Racing is one of the popular series running at the moment, and these cars are extremely fun to throw around, and they are pushed side to side by others. The racing is extremely close, almost like being one of those touring car videos from the 90s. In the GTs or any faster classes, it will be more spaced out, like it happens with everyone else, but something that needs to be said about the aero wash or the dirty air, it seems like the dirty air is inverted. If you have a highly loaded car that needs a lot of aero, the car in front seems slower than the car behind through the corners, which is something weird. Now, the other staple will be the Forza drivers. We've seen all of these videos with a bunch of crashes. These exist in Forza Motorsports. I've dealt with a few, but I can say that they aren't really a constant issue in my opinion. There's a couple of them every so often, and that's really about it. As for the remaining drivers, there's plenty of times. There's the clueless ones, the overcommitted, the gentleman driver, and the fastest heck. You have a mix between all of this because of the system of the lobby. It is a feel as you go. You really don't get matched with people of your rating, sadly. This means that the experience will vary a lot between races in terms of separation of skill. It can be good for you as you can, race with guys in front of you that are more or less your speed, but then the guys behind will be miles and miles away. This has happened a lot to me. Forza has a penalty system that can be gamed. You can basically throw a guy out if you want to, and it won't give you a lot of penalty, but then it also gets you really weird sometimes when you go over a corner. It gives you 8 seconds when you didn't gain 8 seconds. Also, this game also needs a car radar, as the arrows aren't really that good and the side awareness isn't really the best in these types of games if you don't have like an ultra wide screen or something like that. The arrows will give you just the indication. It's very hard to understand if they are close or far away. In terms of approaches for multiplayer, Gran Turismo went for the get racing faster approach where they pull everybody together. Forza went to a more iRacing Assetto Corsa Competizione type of lobby, but without pulling everybody together, which is kind of strange. It does create a different type of racing, and Forza, in my opinion, is just slightly better for that, but Gran Turismo is better for competition. But to conclude, and the video is getting too long, I think it's obvious from this video that, in my opinion, the better title as of this moment, or at least the one that is in better state, is Gran Turismo 7. In terms of gameplay, mechanics, systems in place, stability of the game, options, multiplayer, and so forth, Gran Turismo is a more complete, a better thought-through product. That's really not to say that Forza doesn't have any value or anything, because you've probably seen in my streams or videos that I really enjoy the driving and multiplayer of Forza immensely. I appreciate the multiplayer format it gives us, but sadly the skill difference is way too much at the time. Still, if you look at the start of both games, In the launch state, Forza is really in a severely worse state than Gran Turismo was, and Gran Turismo was already a mess at the start. I really think we can all agree on that. Forza, in my opinion, still has a long way to go. Gran Turismo is a far more mature product, and honestly, for me, it looks better and has more to enjoy. But let us know your opinions below.